Hello everyone, this is Brad Tallis from Autodesk. Welcome to another Fusion 360 Live. You might notice my background looks a little bit different. I'm actually coming to you from the wonderful city of Sidney, Nebraska instead of Fort Collins, Colorado. My wife is up here working at the hospital up here, and so I'm actually in the RV. She comes up here for about 6 weeks, and we got stuck in a snowstorm, so I've been up here for about a week. So hopefully this will go smoothly. I don't have my multiple monitors. I don't even have the parts with me that we're going to be creating today. I usually like to show them on the camera and stuff, but and I'm working from a hotspot, so hopefully the connection is good. I have my friend Angelo on chat, so if you have any questions as we're going through, please feel free to post them into the chat window. So we are going to continue from where we left off last week, or last time I should say, since Angelo did a presentation last week. So we are going to be creating actually 3 parts today. They're fairly simple parts. This is what I'm calling the piston assembly. So there's this case that we're going to be creating, and then we're going to be doing the actual little piston part. And then we'll end with creating this spring. So like usual, I have the outline that I usually put together in the description of the video, and I also have this drawing that I just referenced is also in the description of the video. So feel free to download those when you have a chance. Okay, so let's dive in. So what I want to do, we left off, we created this cutter assembly, and I'm going to be creating this piston assembly. So I'm going to start out by right-clicking and saying New Component, and we're going to create a piston assembly component. And you'll see that puts us right here. And then I'll create a new sketch. And I'm going to put the sketch on this front plane. Now we're going to do something a little bit interesting. I'm going to create the parts not in the correct location. When we've been doing all of these other parts, I've been kind of building them on top of each other. This time I'm going to build them down here kind of at the origin because you can see, that's where the main part is. And then we're going to position it into place a little bit later. Okay, so in fact, I'll turn off that cutter assembly. I'm going to, instead of switching back and forth quite a bit, I'm basically referencing these dimensions on this view right here. So you're going to see I'm basically going to draw this outside profile, and then we're going to revolve that part around. Since it's a round part, we're going to use the revolve command. So I'm just going to quickly kind of mock up what that overall shape should look like. So I'm just going to start drawing something like this. I'm not worried about dimensions right now. All I really care about are the lines, vertical, horizontal, that kind of a thing. So I am taking a little bit of time to make sure that my lines are horizontal and vertical. You can see the 90-degree perpendicular icons, the constraints there on the sketch. Now I'm going to come in and start throwing on some of the dimensions. And notice right here it says the dimension is 2.3. Well, in reality, I need that dimension to be 1.2. So I'm going to type in 1.2 and watch what happens. My whole sketch goes smaller, and that is an option in the preferences. So if you go up into preferences, I personally like how this works, so I would recommend turning it on. But under general design, scale entire sketch at first dimension. That's what caused the whole thing to scale down. Otherwise, your sketch might get kind of a weird shape, because of, if this got smaller, this point would be up above it and all that kind of stuff. It gets kind of confusing. So I personally really like that preference. The next thing I want to do is I know the diameters, but this is half of the part. So I've shown this in other live streams, but just to repeat, I want to create a diameter dimension. So I'm going to click the axis line first, then I'm going to click this other line second. And by default, it just wants to dimension the distance between those two lines. But I can right mouse click, and you'll notice there's an option here for diameter dimension. And now you can kind of see how it's stretching all the way across. I'll go ahead and place that and type in 0.613 according to the drawing. I can continue adding other dimensions on here. So this is supposed to be 0.1. You can kind of see how my lines are turning black, showing that they're constrained. So again, I'll do a diameter dimension from here to here. Right mouse click, diameter. And then I'll just say that guy is supposed to be 1.13. And then from here to here, diameter dimension. And the key thing is to start with the axis and then go to the outside diameter. If I started here and went here, my dimension would show, would try and dimension over here, which is not the center line. Okay, excuse me. And this is supposed to be 1.18. And I'll just kind of finish throwing some dimensions on here. Again, these are all coming off of the drawing. So I can see all of those look constrained, except for this line here. So I need to throw maybe a dimension from here to here. And that's supposed to be 1.03. Whoops, sorry. That wasn't, let me do that dimension again. Dimension from here to here. Okay, so it said it would over-constrain the sketch. Not sure why I would get that. Give me a second here. Oh, I see why. I was dimensioning to the wrong point. I was dimensioning to this point here, and so it was telling me that it was going to over-constrain the sketch. So you saw that little tip that I did. I usually click on a line or a point, and it visually tells me what's going on, and I can see, oh, this line could change its length or its height, and that was the clue that I was dimensioning the wrong thing. So now you notice I don't get that error message. I'll say 103, and there we go. It's fully constrained. So I'll finish my sketch. I'm going to use the revolve command. And here's a neat thing Fusion does. If you have one sketch, it's going to automatically select that for you. It selected my profile for me. What's my axis? I'm going to click on this line here, and it's going to revolve 360 degrees around. Okay. I'm going to do a shout out again for Angela helping me out. So Angela, I can't see the chat, so if there's any important questions that come through, please text them to me and I'll try and review those as we're going through. Okay, so now I've got the basic shape, but of course it's a hollowed out plastic part. So I'm going to shell this guy out. I could use the command up here, or if I pre-select a face and right mouse click, it shows me the commands that make sense, and one of them is shell. I can also add in another face. Okay, so you can see I'm selecting both those faces, and as I start to drag, it's basically going to hollow out this part. So again, I'm keeping my sketch simple. It's just the outside profile, and then I'm using the shell command to create this inside profile. And to me, I like using this method way better than having to like offset, you know, these lines and all that kind of stuff. I like to keep my sketches simple and then use the shell command, because we can always come back and change the thickness of the wall thickness if we need to with that shell feature. Okay, let me jump to the model here. So the next thing I want to do is kind of create these little grooves that you see on this bottom part of the part. And it's kind of hard to see, but there's some indentations on the inside also. You can kind of see if I zoom up here. So we're going to be creating those guys. And that is right here in this detail. So I'll use that information. So what I'm going to do is create a sketch on this bottom face. And you'll notice the word bottom is upside down. So I'm going to rotate this. It's better to have bottoms up, I think. So I'm going to make it so the text is that way. And then I'm going to project. So P for project. And I want to project this face right here. And you can see as I hover over it, it's going to project onto this face. So you can kind of see that red line up here. So I'm going to project that face. And it's going to give me some geometry that I can reference. Okay? So excuse me, I'm going to use that. So I'm going to create a circle, and sometimes I'll create a circle out in space and then put it where I want it to be. But I've shown in some of my other live streams with these constraints, if you get near this edge, you can kind of see it sort of snap to that edge, and it's going to automatically create a coincident constraint for me. If I click there, that center point is on that coincident constraint on that edge. Now I'm going to come over to this construction line and I'm going to move, and it's kind of hard to see because of the gray, but it's automatically creating a tangent constraint for me. So I'll go ahead and click there, and sure enough you can see the tangent constraint. So this point is going to stay on that edge, okay? And it's going to stay tangent to that edge there. Now I want it to be perfectly centered, so I'm going to use one more constraint. I'll use the horizontal vertical. Click there, and you'll see it. It makes those 2 points be vertical with each other. And it turned black, means it's constrained. And there we go. And I didn't even have to type in a dimension. I'm just using the construction line kind of as the reference. I do want to have an offset of 0.04, and basically I'm using this inner circle to create the groove, and then I'm using this outer circle to create that indentation on the inside of the part. So I'm basically doing 2 things with one sketch in this case. Okay, so as I rotate here, you'll see I can go ahead and select. Now, all I really need to do is to select this profile, but I personally, I don't know if it's just me, I like to select both of these to make sure I'm physically cutting everything. If it was just like this, and maybe this face was tapered ever so slightly, it could create what I would call a sliver face. So I like to almost imagine like this is my cutter, and I'm machining it through, and so I'm going to use as much information as possible. So I'll say extrude, and I want to go up to this shelf. So I could drag and click on that shelf, right? But we've learned that the better method is, instead of saying distance, is to say to object, and then I can come in and select that shelf. And what that means is it's going to extrude up to that face, to that object. And if we were to ever change where that shelf is supposed to be, this knows that it's supposed to extrude to that shelf, to that object. So no matter where that object is, it's always going to extrude to it. So this is a really good method to use instead of a distance or just clicking on an edge for the distance. So there you can kind of see it cut the little groove. I'm going to turn our sketch back on and kind of rotate it this way. I'll click on this guy and say extrude, and kind of the same idea. Start to drag. Instead of the distance, I'm going to say to object, and I'll click on that little shelf right there. And of course I want this to join. I want it to be the same part of the same body, and we've just created kind of a little groove and a little indentation. Okay, I don't want to have these sharp edges, so I'll pre-select them and say fillet, and let's just do 0.05 for the fillet so we can see what that looks like. And then I want to pattern this around, so I only have to create one, and then I can use the circular pattern command. Now here's the important thing. By default, this is usually set to faces, and I could manually come in and click all of these faces. I'd have to rotate, etc., etc. I could do that, But instead, I like to come in here and say features. And I can select the first extrude feature, the second extrude feature, which is on the inside, and then the fillets, which are here. So it's selecting all of those features. And I didn't have to select the faces. It's selecting any and all faces that have to do with those features. What's my axis? I could just click on a cylindrical axis. It doesn't really matter in this case. And I want to do a quantity of 4. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And after I do a pattern, I like to confirm that everything worked. And you'll notice that sure enough, these rotated on the inside also. Every once in a while, you'll get a situation where it might pattern the outside grooves, but for whatever reason, it didn't do the inside grooves. So I always like to check to make sure that that worked, which it did. Okay. Moving on here, I'm going to create a sketch on this top face. I'll show you where we're at real quick. So we just did these grooves that go all the way around. And now there's these 3 little alignment nubs, I don't know what the correct terminology is, that are on this top face. You can kind of see those right here. So we're going to create, in the very similar scenario, we're going to use a pattern and everything like that. Okay, so I'm going to create a circle. I'm going to get kind of near this circular edge. You can kind of see how it's snapping to it. And again, you'll notice I'm not clicking right here assuming that I'm perfectly straight up and down. I'm clicking over here somewhere a little bit, like so. And let's just do 0.08 according to the drawing. And then I want to make sure that it's lined up. So horizontal, vertical. And now I'm confirmed that sure enough that circle is exactly right above the origin. Okay. Now here's something you might run into every so often. I'm going to click on this profile here and say extrude. Okay. Now, I want it to go to this edge, but if we look at the inside, it's kind of hard to see. This is a tapered face. Remember we had that little angled line? You know, you can kind of see it's tapered there. Okay, so I'm going to say distance to object, but you'll notice that there's really not an object for me to go to. So if I click on that guy, I don't get a result. In fact, it says tool body creation failed. So there's really not an object to go to. It's floating in air, basically. So that's why that isn't working. Okay, so in this case, I might have to say go to a particular distance. So I'm going to start to drag. But when I try and click on this edge, you'll notice that there's a sketch in the way. Okay, so I could try clicking and holding, but you'll also notice that it's not finding an edge to click to. Okay, so I'm going to turn off my sketch, and now I can click to that edge right there, and you can see that sure enough it extended down. Okay. Okay, so, and I'm going to say join. Okay, so I just got a text message from Angelo saying the fillets didn't pattern, and good point. I'm kind of rushing through. I said, you know, I was more concerned about the inside, but sure enough, it looks like the fillets didn't pattern. At least some of them didn't. Okay, so let's go back to this pattern here. Thank you for pointing that out, whoever on the chat put that out there. So right here it says compute option is adjust. So that's kind of the default. Well, I want them to be identical. So you can see it says creates identical copies by replicating results of the original feature. So I'm going to switch that to identical and say OK. And that didn't fix it. Well, it did. except for one, which is that's really interesting. I'm not sure why. So let's try that again. Edit feature. And let's try optimized and see if we get different results. So optimized worked in that case. So, and you're actually going to see another example of this later on. That's why I kind of gave you a quick preview of it, you know, foreshadowing, but sure enough, it actually bit me early on. So thank you, whoever mentioned that and noticed that. So now we have the correct result. So just really quick to review, this compute option, you have different solutions, and you're going to see a really good example here in just a moment as we work on the inside of this part. So if it doesn't work with one of them, try the other two and see if you get a better result. So, okay. So let's move on. So I just created this little indentation, and again, the little review that I did there was the sketch was in the way. It wouldn't let me click this edge, and so I went ahead and turned off that sketch, and now you can see that the sketch is not in the way. So every once in a while you might have to do that. Okay, small little fillets here. So I'm going to select that edge there and that edge there. Let's do a small fillet of 0.01. Okay, and then the same thing we did earlier. I'll say pattern, circular pattern, making sure it's features. And this time it's just the one extrude and the one fillet feature. I'm going to select my axis. I like to select a solid axis, like this one would work, but I'm going to click on this outside one. And notice we get 3. I'm going to go to 4. Okay. Now let me turn this to identical. Let's try optimize, see what we get. I'm not getting my preview, which is kind of weird. You'll notice there's also these check boxes here. If I say OK, I'm going to get 4 of these features. Well, I only want 3, but I want them at the north, west, east locations, right? So I'm going to come back in here and edit this guy and leave it at 4, but then I'm going to come in and uncheck one of these, and you'll notice that it turned off that one right there. And so it's still a pattern of 4, but I'm only having it display 3. And that's what this suppress option is, these little check boxes. So I could suppress any of these, and you'll see that they go away. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and do that guy, say OK, and the fillets worked on that one, so that's cool. And let's continue on. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is these grooves that you see in here, in the section view and in this ISO view. We're going to create those. They start a little bit higher up from the bottom, so I'm going to use an offset construction plane. I'll click on that face there. I like to start to drag the direction I want it to go, and I can see it's a negative number, so I need to say minus 0.1. Because on the drawing we can see that they start 0.1 up from the bottom. Okay, then I can create a sketch on that guy. And again, just me, I like to make sure the text is facing the right way, so I'm going to rotate it like so. And then I need to grab some information, so I'm going to project this face. And you'll see that it gave us a lot of information there. I now know where the center of this circular shape is, which I can create a center rectangle. And I'm going to basically use this center rectangle to create that shape of that rib. So I know that I need it to be 0.035 wide. And then for the height, I'm going to say 0.18. Okay. Now this is the overall height of the rectangle. So you can see it's that overall height, and all we really care about is this little section right down here. We don't care about the rest of it. So I'm going to say OK, done with my sketch. I'm going to grab that profile and say extrude. Okay, we're going to see some interesting things happen here. So I selected my profile. Again, I'm going to use to object, and I'm going to select this tapered or this angled face. And when I click on it, you'll notice I get an error message. Tool body creation failed. And you're like, well, why is that? Well, it has to do with this option right here, chain faces. And I don't know if you can see the icon very well, but it basically is showing like multiple faces, and the extrude is stopping at the very first one. And so by this being checked as default, it's basically going to go down to this shelf and stop, but then there'd be like an overhang. Okay. With this guy, it's going to extend all the way down. So you can see how it's kind of wrapping around those curved faces. So when I click on that option, sure enough, you can see how it's going down to this shelf and then continuing on down to this angled face. So if you're ever trying to do an extrude and you get a weird result, you might check out this chain faces option and see if that helps. I'll go ahead and say join. We'll say okay. That looks great. Okay. So this is where we're going to get some interesting stuff happening. I'm going to fillet this edge here. And as I start to push in, you can see that I can actually make a fillet bigger. So you can kind of see how it really kind of rolls over this edge, which is really kind of cool. And by the way, I don't know if you've noticed, we pushed out a new release where you can change the tangency weight of your fillets now, which is really pretty cool. So if you haven't done this already, check out the What's New, and you'll see all the stuff we recently added in Fusion, and tangency weight is one of them in the fillet command. So, okay, so this guy is supposed to be 0.08. You can see how it kind of wraps around really nice. Looks pretty cool. And then again, we're going to pattern. So I'll say circular pattern, making sure it says features. I'll do the extrude and the fillet. Okay. Now, by default, I think this is set to adjust. And I'm going to show this here in just a second. What's my axis? I'll click on a cylindrical surface or an edge, doesn't matter. And I actually want 12 of these. So I can type in 12, gives me a nice preview. I'll say OK. And it created those ribs. But check this out. I'm going to kind of look at it from the top, or from the bottom, I should say. And you'll notice that that surface is not touching the inside wall. So it's kind of hard to see, but you can kind of see that right there. So it did exactly what I told it to. It took that and patterned it around. And obviously this is not the result that we want. And this is what I was leading to earlier when you guys found out the fillet issue. So I'm going to edit this pattern feature and change my compute option. Okay, so I'm going to say optimized. I'll say OK. And now we can see that sure enough, those extended. So even though this is a little bit smaller, right, it grew those faces to make sure that they're touching the next boundary. So again, check your work as you're going through, making sure everything looks good. And we give you the flexibility to fix those problems. Okay, so we'll go here and here, fillet those edges, 0.01, just a small little fillet, and we actually are done with this model. Okay, lots of patterns, obviously, but it wasn't too difficult to create. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a part that goes inside this guy. So I'm going to switch to my next drawing here. This is what I'm just calling the piston, because the spring kind of pushes up on this inside that case. This is going to take a little bit of time because we're going to use the revolve command again. So I'm going to have to create this interesting shape that you see over here. But you'll see the benefit of doing it this way. So I'm going to right click on my piston assembly and say new component. I'll call this piston. Say OK. And now you can see this is grayed out, or kind of ghosted out, and piston is our active component now. I'll start with a sketch once again on this front face, but I want to capture some information, so I'm going to hit P for project. Now by default, it's set to specified entities, which is basically just allowing me to pick individual little areas, okay, or edges or whatever. If I click on bodies, it basically is kind of doing like a silhouette. You'll notice it's not letting me pick these inside faces or ribs, and when I click that, it's going to project just the outside, which is what I want in this case. Okay, so I can turn off, let's turn off that body there, so I just have this, and again, using the drawing, I'm just going to kind of mock up what that profile looks like. So I know it kind of comes up and over a little bit. Again, I'm not worried about the overall shape. I'm just more concerned about, are the lines, you know, horizontal, vertical, that kind of a thing. So I'm just going to draw some stuff here. Go up like so. Come over a little bit. Come down a little bit. Just something like this. Again, just kind of mocking up the shape that I see on the drawing. Okay, so you can see all of the 90-degree or perpendicular constraints, which is good. Okay, the next thing I want to do is to make sure some lines are collinear with each other. Like these two lines are supposed to be lined up, these two lines are supposed to be lined up, and even these two lines are supposed to be lined up. And I purposely drew them not lined up so you can see the benefit of using collinear. So I'm going to say I want that line and that line to be collinear with each other, in line with each other. I want that line and that line to be collinear, and I want that line and that line to be collinear. So you can kind of see how they're all in line with each other now. Okay, and the next thing I'm going to do is add some dimensions. And again, these are all from this section view, and you'll notice some of these have the diameter symbol on it, so I'm going to be using the diameter dimension in this case. So D for dimension, and I'll go ahead and start with this point here to this point here. And again, it's going to take me a moment to do these guys. So that's supposed to be 0.51. You can kind of see it updates really quick. The next one is from the center point to this guy here, this edge, diameter dimension 0.88. And sometimes it moves the dimension. I'm not sure why, but I'm going to drag it down here just to kind of keep my sketch a little bit cleaner. Okay, D for dimension again, starting from the center. And let me show you, I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to do a diameter dimension. I'm supposed to click here, and then I'm supposed to click here. But if I clicked here first, and then I did that line, and I said diameter dimension, notice where it's putting my dimension, right? So you always want to select the axis first. So that's my axis, that's the edge, then I can come in and say diameter dimension, and I get the correct result. So that's supposed to be 0.96, and you're going to see as I start going through, things are going to start turning from blue to black, saying that they're constrained. Okay, from here to here is supposed to be a certain distance, so 0.07. You can kind of see the whole thing move down when I did that. This edge is 0.3. You can kind of see things are updating. This edge is 0.058. This is 0.09. Again, just grabbing this information from my drawing, and we can see that things are starting to constrain. This is 0.04. This is 0.1. Okay. 0.05, getting closer. Let's see, I need to do another diameter dimension. So from here to here is, let me go diameter dimension, and I'll say 0.4. And now we can kind of see that starts to update. And then lastly, this is from here to here is 0.06. Okay. Okay, I can see that except for that line right there is blue, so I need to define the overall height. So I'm going to go from here to here, and that is supposed to be 0.82, and now I'm complete. Now here's a neat little tip for you. As you're working on something that's as complex as this, you have some options over here. So for example, I could turn off show constraints, and it turns off all of those constraints, right? I could even say turn off show dimensions, and I'm just looking at my profile. So you have a couple options in here to take a look at. Okay, so I'm going to finish my sketch. We'll do the revolve again. Now here's a tip. Notice I clicked on my profile, but because this line cuts through my profile, it didn't select this guy. And this actually burned me. I created my whole outline with screen captures and everything, and I get to the very end and I realized that something was wrong, and it was this little guy. So I'm going to make sure I'm selecting him also. What's my axis? It's going to be that center line, which is right here. So these two lines right here are basically, I'm not using them, I just used them to define my center line. And we're going to revolve, and you can see, yes, we took some time to create a profile, but you can see all of the stuff that we created with it. I could have used the cake method, the layered cake method I've shown in the past, but this I think makes more sense doing a revolved profile. So there we go. Okay. Now I want to use information from this body. Remember we spent the time creating those little notches that are in there, those three little bosses or whatever you want to call them. Well, I want those to help line up this other part. So I'm going to use this part. So I'm going to say combine. What's my target? That's my target. What's the tool? The tool is going to be this outer case. And again, by default, it wants to join them together, but I'm going to come in here and say cut. And you can kind of see a little bit of a preview what it's going to do. It's going to cut some geometry. And I want to make sure I'm keeping my tool. By default, that's not turned on. So I'm going to turn that on, and that's going to keep the case. If that was turned off, it would throw away the case. It says, okay, you used it to cut, you don't need it anymore. But we obviously want to keep it. So I'm going to say okay. And look at the result that we got. Okay. It's good, but not great. It cut that geometry out of there, but we obviously want it to go all the way up and down the surface, so this can slide up into that part. Okay. Now, typically, I've shown how powerful direct modeling is. So I could say, for example, if I delete that face, it's going to grow to the next boundary. So I'm going to say delete, and I get a really weird result. I don't expect that to happen. Why did it delete this whole feature or anything like that? And it could be because these fillets aren't true fillets anymore because they were, Boolean cut into this part. So we're going to have to fix this in a slightly different method than just using direct modeling techniques. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of these fillets because I want them to be true fillets when we're all said and done. So I'm going to select these faces, oops, and rotate around, grab that, and I'm just going to say delete on my keyboard, or I can right mouse click and say delete, and you'll see that we've now removed those fillets off of there. So the next thing I would try is I would try deleting this face again, but I get the same result, which is kind of weird. Okay, so I can't use direct modeling. So what I want to do is extrude this shape down to here. So I'm going to go ahead and select that face and say extrude. I didn't have to project it. I didn't have to create geometry. I'm basically saying I want to move this face. I want to extrude this face down. I could probably also use press pull. You might try that if you want to. So in this case, obviously I don't want to go a distance. I want to say to object, and I'm going to say go to that object. And I also want to do all 3 profiles at the same time, not just one at a time. So I'm going to select all 3 profiles. Now I can't do the upper ones because they're going to a different object, right? So I do have to do this as a 2-step process, but you can kind of see we're going to extrude that shelf down to this other shelf with the cut command. And there we go. Same idea here. I'm going to select that face, say extrude, start to drag, okay? How far? I want to go to object. So I'm going to say that. And then I can come in and select these other faces. So I'm going to select that face there, and I'll select this face here. You can kind of see how it's going to that. I'll say OK. So I know that seemed like a couple extra steps, but we were able to use the geometry from this body right here, and you can kind of see how that's going to line this piston. It's going to be able to slide all the way up through the opening of this body that you see right there. Okay. The last thing we want to do on this part is there's this little notch you can kind of see right here. And it kind of goes up inside the part a little bit. And did I leave that dimension out? I did. I apologize. Gosh darn it. So it's 0.1 from the center, so I will try and update the drawing for you guys, but let me turn off this body. I'm going to create a sketch on the bottom here. I'll just rotate that guy around. And I'm just going to draw a rectangle. As long as it goes over these 2 circles here, so I'm going to just do a rectangle like this, okay? And then I can throw a dimension on here. So I need it to be 0.1 from the center of the part. And then I'm going to make sure that this extends all the way past it. So basically it's allowing me to create this profile that you see right here. Now I always say try and constrain your sketches as much as possible. In this case I'm kind of just using this as a cutting tool. So I'm not going to fully constrain this or dimension it, but I totally could. If you want to, please feel free to do that. So I now have that particular shape. I can say extrude, and we're going to start to cut away. So you can kind of, oops. I don't have my 3D mouse with me either, so I feel half naked here. I want to go to object and click on this inside face. And so you can kind of see it's going to cut down through until it gets to that face right there. And there's our part. Okay. Cool. And believe it or not, that is it for that little piston part. So we've whipped out 2 parts pretty darn quick. The next part is the spring, and this is actually kind of fun. I get to show a command I haven't shown yet, which is the coil command, and then we're going to do some interesting stuff with this. So you'll notice that, give me a second here, okay. Hopefully it's still sharing good for you guys. The height of it is 1.75, and then the section diameter is 0.04. Okay, so let's work on that guy. So I'm going to, again, right-click on my piston assembly and say New Component. We'll call it Spring. I'll say OK, and now I'm working on this spring. Okay, good. Thank you, Angelo. My hotspot just beeped at me, so I was worried it's like you've used up all your data or something like that. So, okay, so I'm going to keep this part up because I'm going to start my spring on this part. So we're going to go to the Create menu and then Coil. And obviously the image, it looks like a spring. So I'm going to say coil. Now it's asking where do you want to start the coil. And I'm going to touch this face right here, this surface right there. And when I do that, you'll see that it's going to let me pick a center point. And then I can specify the diameter of the spring. And in this case, it's 0.93. Now watch what happens when I hit OK. I get a really big result. Okay. So, without going into too much detail, we give you lots of options for the type of coil: revolution and height, revolution and pitch, height and pitch, or spiral, which is on one plane. So I'm going to do revolution and height. I've said the diameter is 0.93. How many revolutions? I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to change the section size, and from the drawing, remember it was 0.04. When I change that, you can see that my wire gets smaller. How many revolutions? I want to do 6 revolutions, and you can see it's going to take and make a coil, and it's revolving it 6 times. The next thing is the height, and that was that 1.75. So watch what happens when I do that. It kind of stretches the spring out a little bit. So you can see how powerful and how quick we can create something like this. Okay. You can also change the section to be, square or triangular or whatever. We're going to do circular. And then you have some section positions on the inside, on the center, on the outside. We're going to do it on center. And I'm just going to go ahead and say OK. And so now we have this spring. Now I wish I had my parts with me. The spring that's in the example, it coils around, and then it has a little section near the top and a little section near the bottom where it's kind of flat. And you see that typically on springs, and so we're going to recreate that or simulate that with this guy. So I'm going to turn off the piston, and basically what I want is, you can kind of see how this is ramping up. I basically wanted to do another mostly revolution, but on one plane. Okay, and this will make sense once you see it. To do that, remember I created the coil at a certain location. Well, now I want to continue this coil, so I'm going to do an offset plane of this flat plane right here, okay? And I need it to be exactly at the end of that coil right there. So instead of distance, I'm going to say to object. And let me zoom up on here, and you can see that there's an edge right here that goes all the way around. So I'm going to get near that end point of that edge, and you can see that little circle appear. So I'm going to click, and it just put that plane right at that edge, right at that point on that edge. So I know exactly that that plane is slicing through right there. Okay. Now, I could have left this at distance and clicked on that point and got the exact same result. But in this case, I want to make sure I'm saying to object, because we're going to have some fun here in just a moment. We're actually going to change the size of the spring, and I want to make sure that the end of my little coil here stays connected to the end of my spring. You'll see that as we move forward. So to object, I'm clicking that point. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And then we can do the coil command again. On that plane, it found the center for me, so I'm going to click there. Diameter is 0.93. And you'll notice I get a continuation of my spring. So the first thing I'm going to do is, hopefully you know this tip. If I click this little down arrow, it remembers your last typed in settings. So there's my 0.04. So instead of me having to type it in, I can just click on it and it'll select it. Okay. I don't want to cut. I want to join this spring together, but I don't want it to keep going up. So here's where we're going to make some changes. Revolution, I'm going to say 1. Okay. And then for the height, I can't type in 0, so I'm going to type in a very small number, like 0.001. Okay? And so what it's going to do is you can kind of see, and it's going to give me an error. I'll tell you why here in a second. Instead of going up with a higher pitch, it's a really shallow pitch. And it's going to continue from that point. Now, why did it give me the error message? Well, it's because it's wrapping on itself and it's cutting into its body right here. So I can't do a full revolution. Let's type in 0.5, and there you can see what it's going to do. Okay, so I found that 0.85, I think, is a good distance in this case. It goes mostly all the way around before it starts to intersect. I'm going to join those together, and now you can kind of see what, you'll see these springs. Let me just kind of look at it like this, where it kind of coils around and then it has this flat loop kind of near the top. Okay, so I'm going to do the exact same thing for the bottom. Offset plane. I'll click on that flat plane. I'll say to object. That's really important here. You'll see in a minute. It's going to go to that object. So wherever that point is, that plane is going to stay there. Okay, coil. Center is that guy there, 0.93. I get, again, kind of a weird result. I'm going to change that to 0.04. I know my revolutions is 0.085, but you'll notice it's kind of going up. Well, I want it to go down. So for the height, I'm going to say minus 0.001. And there you can kind of see it's just going to ever so slightly go down. But again, I get that really nice closing coil. We're going to join that together. And we now have a pretty cool looking spring. Okay. I think that is it for that. So the next thing we're going to do is assembling all these parts together. So I'm going to, let's go ahead and activate this piston assembly. I'm going to right mouse click. I'm going to say show all components, and I'll say show all bodies. So I can see what this looks like. Okay. Now these parts are all kind of stuck together, which is kind of hard to see. If you've been following along, I've done some section analyses in the past. So you can see I have an analysis folder. If I click on that, I already have a section analysis that slices through. If you don't, you could just go to section analysis and pick like on the front plane, the front origin plane, and it'll slice right through your model. So let's take a look at this. Okay. So we can see all of these parts, and I see a couple little issues. There's actually room, if this spring is going to push this part up, there's actually some room right here that it could get pushed up. We also see that the spring is kind of, intersecting this part, and that's because we did the on center, for example. So I want to fix some of this, but I want Fusion to fix it for me, and that's where this gets pretty cool. So what I'm going to do is I want to ground this outside part here. So I'm going to right click on piston assembly, and I'm going to say ground. Okay. So you can see that little thumbtack icon. It's now ground in place. But you can see I can move the spring. I can grab this guy and move it around. Okay. What I want to do now is use some of the methodologies in the assemble menu to help me assemble this thing together. So I'm going to turn on enable contact sets. Okay, then I'm going to say new contact set. And I want to know when this body is going to clash or intersect with that body. So you can kind of see, or components I should say, two are selected. I'll say OK. And for now, I'm going to turn the spring off just so we don't see it. And then I'm just going to grab this part, and It's not moving, so there might be an issue, and I think I might have gotten a text message from Angelo in regards to this. Sure enough, what is going on, and this actually happened to me earlier, so I think it was Steve that saw this. You'll notice that I forgot to fillet these edges, and it's already clashing with this body right here. Okay, and this happens, right? I know you guys love it when I kind of stumble and stuff like that. How do we fix that? Well, that's the piston, so I'm going to activate the piston. Let's turn off the analysis real quick. And I must have forgotten a step. Yeah, I don't even see a fillet in there. I apologize. So I'll go ahead and grab these edges real quick. So notice I'm activated the piston, so these are only the features in the timeline that have to do with the piston. So I'll come in here and grab those, say fillet, and I'm going to have to scroll through my notes to see what size. I think that's 0.0. Yeah, I did. I totally forgot to do that. 0.01. 0.01. There we go. Okay. So I think, Steve, I think you were the one that mentioned that, so thanks for noticing that. Okay, so now let's try this. I'm going to go back to my piston assembly. I'm going to turn my analysis back on. So we're kind of looking at it from the side here. Okay. Okay, so now hopefully when I drag this, sure enough, you can see it moves now. So to refresh what we just did there, we created what's called a contact set. It checks to see if parts are intersecting or touching each other. When do they come in contact with each other? Now notice I can move my cursor all the way around, and it's only letting me move this up and down. I have not created any joints to say that this is a slider joint or anything like that. So why is it only going up and down? Well, it's because of these grooves right here. So Fusion knows that, you know, it has to stay lined up with those grooves, just like it does in the real pencil sharpener. So it helps align. Now, as I move up, you can see it stops, even though I'm clicking and dragging, and the reason for that is that corner is hitting that wall. So when the spring is pushing on this part, it's going to push it up against this wall. So this is exactly where that part is going to be, mechanically. So I'm going to go ahead and capture the position. So hopefully you guys think that's as cool as I do. I mean, I could have done dimensions and all that kind of stuff, but we now know that this part is exactly where it's going to have to be in the real part, in the real design. Okay, let's turn this the spring back on, and now because we've moved this, you'll notice that the spring is no longer pushed up against this piston. And just like before, I can move this spring around, but in this case, I don't have any mechanical things to keep it lined up. Like I had these grooves up here. I don't have that in this spring. So I need to add in some smartness. So I'm going to come in and say, let's do an as-built joint. Okay, the part is already where it needs to be. So I'm going to say as-built joint. I'll say the spring. And I'll say, let's see, do I want to do, yeah, I'll do the case because it's kind of sliding in the case. What's the joint type? By default, it's rigid. Well, I'm going to come in here and say slider. And all I have to do is find like a vertical edge or something like that. So like, for example, this vertical edge here. And then you can kind of see it can do endpoint, midpoint, or endpoint. It doesn't really matter in this case. I'm going to just click that point there. And you can see it gives me a quick little preview of what that's going to look like. So the spring can move up and down inside this case, just in that direction. It can't move left or right or anything like that. Okay, so now if I grab on it, sure enough, you can see we can move it just up and down. Well, I want to move it to the right location. So now that I've created that slider joint, you can see it right there, I can come in and say new contact set. We've already enabled the contact sets. You can see them right there. So I'm going to say new contact set because these are different parts that we're going to check out now. So I want to check when the spring connects with the piston. I'll say OK. I can grab this spring, move it around, but as I move it up, you're going to see I can still move my cursor, but I can't move it any farther up. Okay, so it is mechanically, whoops, pushed too hard. You have to go gentle. So I'm going to push to right there, and you'll notice it's not quite touching, but remember there's a slight angle to the top of the spring, so it's hitting on the back of this part here, but it's pushed up against this piston now. So I'm going to capture that position. Okay, so these parts are now mechanically where they need to be. This is where I think it's going to get pretty fun. This is my favorite part, actually. So, and I know we're at the top of the hour. We're going to go again a few minutes long, but we're almost done here. So now that I have these parts where they are, I want to move them as one solid group. So in the Assemble menu, I could say Rigid Group. And I basically want the whole piston assembly. And notice this says Include Child Components. So if I were to click this piston assembly, you'll notice I get a warning message. It says Slider 1 constrains selected components. Do you want to continue? Yes, I want to keep that slider in there, so I'm going to say yes. But you'll notice how this is highlighted blue. So it's going to grab the piston assembly and anything that's inside of it, including the piston and the spring. So it's going to grab all of those. I'll say OK. And now if I grab this case, which I need to unground, remember I had that little pin icon right there? I've grounded that case because we were kind of pushing parts into that case and I didn't want it to move. So I'm going to come in here and say unground. And now if I grab that case, you can see that all of those parts move together as one rigid group. Okay. Let's turn on part 4, and we can see it's way up here. But we designed all these parts down here. So I don't want this part to move, so I'm going to ground part 4. So I'm going to say ground. We can see that little thumbtack icon. If I try and grab this guy, it won't move. If I grab this guy, it will. Now notice it's kind of a free move, and I want it to move pretty much straight up and down. So once again, I'll come in here and create an as-built joint. It's going to be a slider joint. What are the components? Well, I'm going to do this outside case and this part right here. Then again, it's asking for like a vertical direction. If I let my cursor sit still, it says place joint origin on a component. So you can kind of see I can select one of these edges here. It doesn't matter which one. Now the preview only shows the case moving up and down, and this freaks people out because they're like, hey, aren't they all supposed to move together? Well, we're only talking about 2 components at a time, the component up here and the case. But as soon as I say OK, you'll notice they assemble back together and they all move together because they know that they have to be rigid. Okay? So then I'm going to drag this up, and you'll notice I can go all the way through the part, which obviously we don't want to do. So one more time, I will create a contact set. So I'm going to say new contact set. And what am I concerned about? I want to know when the case is going to touch this case up here. Those are the 2 bodies. So it's going to analyze when are those 2 parts going to intersect. Okay, so let me just drag this up a little bit, kind of zoom up here, drag this up. I'm going to keep moving up Everything's great so far, and then you see, even though I'm still moving up, it stops. And that is because of right here. So you can kind of see how it's intersecting at that corner right there. So we've physically positioned this assembly inside this other assembly. Okay. I'll go ahead and capture that position. And now what I'm going to do is, let's just right click here. Actually, I'll do the top level. Let's go here and I'm going to say show all components. And I'm going to point out some issues and some errors, which we're going to fix in upcoming live streams. In fact, I'm going to address, I think it was Ayal was asking, how do you measure these parts? And again, I don't have any parts with me to show how I'm going to do that, so I'll do that on a future live stream. But literally, I'm just using my digital micrometer and just taking measurements. And you see, that doesn't always lead to really good results. You can see that there's a little bit of a gap here just because of, you know, how I took measurements or whatever. So we're going to fix little things like this. You can also see that this pink part is intersecting with this yellow part. Again, probably by hardly anything at all, but enough that it's actually intersecting. So we're going to fix these in upcoming live streams. We can see that this part obviously sits down inside here, so we're going to position that. And I noticed somebody pointed this out on one of the comments, and this is really embarrassing. I accidentally put this gear in the wrong spot. It looks like it's at the top, but it's actually supposed to be on this surface right here, so it engages with the actual cutter gear. So we're going to have to go back and make a major design change and figure out how do we do that. Okay, so those will be in an upcoming live stream. It's going to be titled Brad's Stupid Mistakes. But the one thing I did want to fix here is notice the spring. Okay, so when I have the spring outside of the pencil sharpener, it's 1.75 inches tall. But when it's inside the pencil sharpener, it's actually compressed and creating, obviously, some spring tension. So we designed it 1.75 inches tall. But it needs to fit in a certain pocket. You can kind of see that pocket right here. So can we fix this? Absolutely. And this is what's, I think, pretty cool. This is my favorite part of the whole live stream today. I need it to fit basically from here, this edge here, to this edge, you know, right here, for example. You can kind of see it's going to sit on that little yellow shelf right there. Okay, so I don't know what that distance is, so I'm going to measure that. So I'm going to say measure. I'm just going to click on like this edge. They're the same line, so I'm going to click on this edge here and maybe this edge here, and we can see that it returns that that's 0.891. Okay, if I hover over the distance result, you'll notice it says click to copy to clipboard. So I'm just going to click, and that copied to my clipboard. Okay, then what I can do is I'll close that out. Let's activate the spring, because anything in the timeline only has to do with the spring, which is much easier to figure out. And the very first one was where we defined the overall height. And then these were where we created those little tiny add-ons, those flat add-ons. So I know this is the one I want to edit, so I'm going to double click on that guy. And instead of the height being 1.75, I'm just going to paste Control V, that number from the calculator, or from the measure, I should say. And I'm going to say OK, and check out what happened. Now you can see we still have the 6 revolutions, but they're much tighter together. However, I see still an issue going on right here. But I'm going to rotate this just so you can kind of see. We took that tall spring, and it's now physically compressed inside our assembly, which I think is wicked cool. Even though we designed it 1.75 tall, it's now this size, but obviously I don't want it clashing. And I can see that it's basically the depth of the diameter of the wire. So check this out. what we're going to do is edit this coil again. And hopefully you guys know this, but it's kind of a hidden secret. Notice it says section size. I'm going to just put my mouse over that, and you see it says D481. So that's a dimension. So that 0.04 is actually a feature, or a parameter, I should say. And in this case, it's the 481th dimension that I've created. So I'm going to remember D481. So now for my height, I can come in here and say subtract D481. I'll say OK. And you can see still slightly, probably need to move it up ever so slightly, but it took the diameter of that spring wire and it moved it up. Okay, and what's cool about this is if I were to change the section size, it would actually update it here also. So if I were to make the section size 0.06 or something like that, it would actually move that up to be 0.06 up there. Okay, I'm going to undo. So that's kind of a cool feature, and that exists in a lot of things. Notice this angle is D482. This is D480. You can reference any of those in formulas or whatever. So let me go ahead and say OK. We now have a majority of our pencil sharpener. We still have to do a little bit on the inside here, but we can see that that's now assembled. It's going to like push this whole thing up. As you push the pencil down, it kind of pushes and compresses the spring, all that kind of stuff. Okay, I know we went a little bit long. I hope this worked for you. I apologize for the working from the RV, but hopefully the live stream went good. I haven't seen any current questions come from Angelo. I will go through and read the comments, and then if you have any questions you want to add into the YouTube video, once it's published, please feel free to do that. Make sure you tune in next week for Angelo. He's going to continue his series on the manufacturer workspace. He's kind of stepping through, giving an introduction to a lot of really cool stuff. So make sure you join next week. Let me see if Angelo said everybody liked it. So thank you, everybody, and have fun fusioning.